Hey, all. Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Women of faith who nursed sick and wounded soldiers were an important part of the story of our Civil War. Today, I want to take you to the Wheeling Hospital in Wheeling, West Virginia, on a fall evening in 1864 to meet one of them, a young Catholic nun. There in Wheeling at the hospital, the Sisters of St. Joseph poured their hearts and souls into care for the sick and wounded Union and Confederate soldiers, young and old from all walks of life, who were patients in the hospital. One of those sisters is pictured here. Her name is Ignatius Farley. She remained on duty in the surgical ward long after her scheduled time. She tended to her tasks until a late hour when finally she was relieved. Exhausted, she quietly made her way towards the sacristy. That's an anteroom off the chapel sanctuary used by priests to prepare for services. She entered the door to the sacristy and closed it behind her softly. There she paused, transfixed. Here's what she saw. Quote, I stood fascinated by the unusual picture of 7 professed sisters, worn out from severe hospital duty, who were lying asleep on the floor, and, soldier fashion, each sister was enfolded in a blanket, while each weary head was resting upon a pillow made of leaves gathered on the campus. Over the sleeping group, which included the Mother Superior, there rested the soft, roseate glow from the sanctuary lamp gleaming through the glass panels of the closed door, and there was still lingering the delicate fragrance of incense used in the adjoining chapel during the evening benediction. End quote. What a marvelous picture of sounds and smells. Sister Farley added, quote, not one of the sisters stirred as I tiptoed to my pallet beside the corridor door to prepare for a few hours' rest before the approaching dawn. The next morning, I learned that late in the afternoon the day before, the sisters had given up their cots and bedclothes to another contingent of wounded soldiers for whom they had found space in one of the corridors. End quote. Sister Ignatius happened to be the youngest of the sisters of St. Joseph in Wheeling, West Virginia. Born Mary A. Farley to Irish immigrants who worked on a farm just south of town in neighboring Marshall County, she became the only one of 5 children who entered the church life. In 1863, when she was 21, Mary took her vows and joined her fellow sisters in the Wheeling Hospital. That hospital had been chartered by nuns in 1856 to serve the growing community. Then the war came, and according to a Catholic historian named Ellen Ryan Jolly, quote, they gave themselves wholeheartedly unto the labor of nursing the suffering soldiers of the blue and gray back to health and strength, end quote. One convalescing Confederate prisoner of war referred to the sisters as angels of the wards. It's a name that would stick for decades and now centuries to come. Assigned to the hospital in January 1863, Sister Ignatius first focused on food preparation and administering medicines under the direction of local physicians. She cared for just a small number of soldiers in one section of the hospital, and in another section took care of local townspeople, balancing between the citizen population and the military that had come into town. That continued until April of 1864, when the federal government designated the facilities as a post hospital. That changed everything. A few months later, in August, it then became a full-fledged general hospital strictly for military purposes. The historian Jolly reported, quote, the peaceful little hospital now served as an army hospital, and instead of the sweet tranquility and quiet comfort that formerly characterized it, The immature hospital had suddenly been transformed into a surging mass of blue uniformed soldiers, excited surgeons, endless rows of snow white beds upon which lay the human toll of many battles. End quote. The reorganization of the hospital for military purposes was timely. Its location, the proximity to Harper's Ferry and the Virginia battlefields resulted in a steady stream of patients. Adding to it, the Shenandoah Valley campaign in the summer and autumn of 1864 only increased the flow of the injured and sick. A number of those men were sent to Wheeling to be cared for by Sister Ignatius and her companion nurses, who were paid by the government for their service. It was during these busy times in the summer and fall of 1864 when the Shenandoah Valley casualty list was growing higher and higher. During those times, as the hospital was filling up, Sister Ignatius and her sisters often slept in those makeshift quarters like the sacristy to make room for the incoming patients. Sleeping on the floor in makeshift beds, giving up their cots and even their bedclothes to the soldiers became a regular feature of their lives. This routine continued into 1865 and the end of the war. When the war ended, there was something of a normal return to routine. Sister Ignatius continued on. She remained in Wheeling and the St. Joseph Convent for the rest of her life. She occasionally talked about her experience. She called them her war stories, and she told them to younger nuns and other folks who were interested in listening to what she had to say. When historian Jolly wrote her story of the nuns in the 1920s, the title of the book is called Nuns on the Battlefield. She described Sister Ignatius's recollection of the episode in the sacristy as the, quote, story of hidden sacrifice, end quote. By this time, the 1920s, Sister Ignatius, who was still alive, had been awarded a bronze medal by grateful veterans of the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, and she also received a pension from the federal government. In 1924, the Nuns of the Battlefield Monument was dedicated in Washington, D.C. Though Sister Ignatius did not attend the ceremony, the bronze relief honored her services and those of many other sisters. There was an inscription above the relief that captured the spirit of their devotion. Quote, they comforted the dying, nursed the wounded, carried hope to the imprisoned, gave in his name a drink of water to the thirsty, end quote. Sister Ignatius lived a long life. Upon her death in December of 1931, just a day shy of her 90th birthday, she was recognized as one of the last of 3 surviving nuns who had served as Civil War nurses. A few months later, a magazine called Catholic Action announced a series of stained glass windows that told the story of Catholicism in America. This series of windows have been installed at Sacred Heart Church in Pittsburgh, PA. One of the panels dedicated to the Civil War includes the likeness of Sister Ignatius. So thanks for listening. There's the story of Sister Ignatius Farley. Did her best to serve the wounded and sick soldiers of the Civil War. Appreciate you listening. See you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.